The fluorescent lights of the Chicago office building hummed overhead as I stared at the email that had just destroyed my life. Outside, the October wind whipped through the concrete canyon of LaSalle Street, rattling the windows of the 42nd floor where I'd spent the last 8 years of my career. Secure $12.4 million in funding within 30 days, or face immediate termination. I read the words again, my hands trembling slightly as I held my phone. The email was from Richard Blackwood, our division's VP, and it might as well have been a death sentence. As the head of business development for Meridian Tech Solutions, I'd closed some big deals before, but nothing close to this magnitude, and certainly not with a timeline that seemed designed to ensure my failure. The rain that had been threatening all morning finally began to fall, creating rivulets down the glass walls of our modern office space. I could see my reflection in the window, a 34-year-old man in a wrinkled navy suit, brown hair disheveled from running my hands through it, dark circles under my eyes from too many late nights trying to save a company that seemed determined to push me out. "Mike, did you get the email?" I turned to see Sarah Chen, my closest colleague and the only person in this building I trusted completely. Her usually pristine appearance was slightly frayed. Her black blazer had a coffee stain and her normally perfect ponytail was coming loose. She'd been working as hard as I had to keep our department afloat. "Yeah, I got it." My voice came out rougher than I intended. 12.4 million, 30 days. It's impossible, Sarah. She walked over to my desk, her heels clicking against the polished concrete floor. The open-plan office around us was buzzing with the usual afternoon energy. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the low hum of conversations about quarterly reports and client meetings. But it all felt distant now, like I was watching it through thick glass. "This isn't about the money, Mike. You know that, right?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "Ever since the merger talks started, Blackwood's been looking for ways to clean house. You're too expensive, too independent. He wants his own people in leadership positions." I knew she was right. Meridian Tech had been family-owned for 30 years until 6 months ago when the Henderson family decided to sell to a larger corporation. The new owners brought in people like Blackwood, corporate sharks who measured success only in spreadsheets and didn't care about the relationships we'd built or the innovation we'd fostered. "So, what am I supposed to do?" I asked, sinking into my ergonomic chair. Even if I had legitimate prospects, 12 million is more than our entire department usually brings in during a good quarter. The absurdity of the situation hit me like a physical blow. I'd given everything to this company. I'd missed my daughter Emma's school plays, worked through weekends, sacrificed my marriage, which had ended in divorce 2 years ago, all for Meridian Tech. And now they were setting me up to fail so they could justify getting rid of me without paying severance. Sarah pulled up a chair beside my desk. "Remember the Morrison Industries deal you were working on last month, before Blackwood killed it?" "Yeah. What about it?" "They were talking about a major expansion into AI-driven logistics. That's easily a $50 million opportunity over 5 years. What if we could revive that conversation?" I shook my head. Morrison's CEO was furious when we suddenly backed out, said it was unprofessional and that he'd never work with us again. Besides, even if we could get back to the table, there's no way they'd commit to a $12 million upfront investment in 30 days. The office was starting to empty as people headed home to their families. I watched Janet from accounting pack up her purse, saw Tom from IT grab his jacket. Normal people with normal jobs who didn't have to worry about impossible deadlines designed to destroy their careers. "Mike," Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. "You can't give up. Not like this." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Emma, my 15-year-old daughter. "Dad, Mom said you might have to move because of work. Are you okay? I'm scared." The message hit me harder than Blackwood's email had. Emma lived with my ex-wife Jennifer in the suburbs, but she spent every other weekend with me in my downtown apartment. She was the brightest part of my life, and the thought of having to uproot everything, maybe even move to a different city to find work, was unbearable. "I have to try," I said, more to myself than to Sarah. "Not for Meridian Tech, not for Blackwood, but for Emma. She's already been through enough with the divorce." Sarah nodded. "Then let's figure out how to make this work. We've got 30 days to pull off a miracle." As I looked out at the Chicago skyline, the lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk, I had no idea that this impossible deadline would lead to the most important revelation of my career. I couldn't have imagined that in trying to save my job, I'd uncover a conspiracy that went far deeper than office politics, or that the person who would ultimately help me wouldn't be who I expected at all. But that's getting ahead of myself. Right now, all I knew was that I had 29 days left to save everything I'd worked for, and the clock was already ticking. Hey everyone, if you're enjoying this story so far, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the upcoming chapters. Also, drop a comment below and let me know what you think is going to happen next. And don't forget to share this with a friend who might enjoy it too. Now let's continue with the story. Chapter 2. Unlikely Allies. The next morning arrived gray and unforgiving, matching my mood perfectly. I'd spent most of the night staring at my laptop screen, researching potential clients and coming up empty. The coffee shop below my apartment building was already bustling with the morning crowd, office workers grabbing their caffeine fix before facing another day in the corporate machine. I ordered my usual large black coffee and found a corner table where I could work without interruption. My phone showed 17 missed calls from various clients, most of them probably wondering why I hadn't returned their calls from yesterday. The weight of the situation was crushing. How do you explain to people that you're suddenly desperate for business without sounding like a complete failure? Michael Patterson? I looked up to see a woman in her 50s standing beside my table. She was impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit, her silver hair pulled back in a sophisticated bun. Everything about her radiated authority and success, from her expensive leather briefcase to the way she carried herself with quiet confidence. Yes? I managed, suddenly aware of how disheveled I must look in yesterday's shirt and my 2-day stubble. My name is Victoria Morrison. I believe you know my husband, James Morrison, from Morrison Industries. My heart nearly stopped. James Morrison was the CEO whose deal Blackwood had killed, the same man Sarah had mentioned yesterday. This was his wife, and she was standing in my coffee shop at 7 in the morning. This couldn't be a coincidence. Mrs. Morrison, I'm not sure what to say. About the deal falling through, I mean. I want you to know that wasn't my decision. She smiled, and there was something almost predatory about it. May I sit? I nodded, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. She sat down gracefully, folding her hands on the table. Up close, I could see she had the same steel-gray eyes as her husband, the kind that missed nothing. My husband was very disappointed when Meridian Tech suddenly withdrew from negotiations, she said, her voice carrying a slight southern accent that made her words sound deceptively gentle. He'd been looking forward to working with you specifically, said you were the first person from that company who actually understood the vision. I appreciate that, Mrs. Morrison, but I'm afraid there's nothing I can do about it now. The decision came from above my pay grade. What if I told you that James never stopped wanting to work with you? What if I told you that Morrison Industries has been waiting for the right opportunity to move forward with that AI logistics expansion, and that they're prepared to make a substantial investment in the right partner? I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. Mrs. Morrison, with all due respect, your husband made it very clear that he wouldn't work with Meridian Tech again. And honestly, after what happened, I can't blame him. She leaned forward slightly. He said he wouldn't work with Meridian Tech. He never said anything about not working with you personally. The implication hit me like a freight train. I don't understand. I work for Meridian Tech. I can't you? She pulled out her phone and showed me a news article from the Chicago Tribune business section. The headline read, Meridian Tech faces federal investigation over accounting irregularities. I'd never seen this article before. It was dated today, published just 3 hours ago. I don't understand. What does this have to do with anything? Michael, my husband isn't just a successful businessman. He's also got connections throughout the federal government from his time as a defense contractor. When Meridian Tech suddenly backed out of our deal, he started asking questions. What he discovered was troubling. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were photocopies of financial documents, emails between Blackwood and various executives, and what appeared to be evidence of systematic fraud. The numbers were staggering. Millions of dollars in artificially inflated contracts, kickbacks to procurement officers, and systematic overcharging of government clients. This is why they needed you gone, Victoria continued. You were asking too many questions about the budget allocations, getting too close to discovering what they were really doing with the money. The impossible deadline isn't about performance, Michael. It's about removing a threat. My hands were shaking as I flipped through the documents. Everything was starting to make sense. The sudden policy changes, the way Blackwood had been isolating me from key decisions, the mysterious budget line items that never seemed to add up. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Because James believes you're a good man who got caught up in something bigger than yourself. And because Morrison Industries needs someone with your expertise to help them navigate the transition to AI-driven logistics. Someone who isn't part of the corruption at Meridian Tech. I closed the folder, my mind racing. What exactly are you proposing? James is prepared to offer you a consulting contract, $12.4 million over 3 years, with $4 million upfront to establish your own independent consulting firm. You help us develop the AI logistics system, and we help you get out from under Meridian Tech's thumb. The amount was exactly what I needed to meet Blackwood's deadline. But there was something else in her eyes, something that told me this was about more than just business. There's a catch, isn't there? Victoria's smile was razor sharp. The federal investigators are going to need someone on the inside who can provide evidence of the fraud. Someone who has access to the financial records and can document the conspiracy. Someone who Blackwood trusts enough to keep around until the investigation is complete. You want me to be an informant. We want you to do the right thing, Michael. And we want to make sure you're protected when you do it. I thought about Emma, about the fear in her text message, about the life I'd built in Chicago. Then I thought about all the honest employees at Meridian Tech who had no idea they were working for criminals, all the government contracts that had been inflated at taxpayer expense. What happens to me when this is all over? James is prepared to offer you a permanent position as head of strategic development at Morrison Industries. Full benefits, stock options, and a salary that's triple what you're making now. Plus, you'll have the satisfaction of knowing you helped bring down a corrupt organization. I looked around the coffee shop, at the normal people living their normal lives, and realized that my normal life was already over. Blackwood had seen to that when he'd given me an impossible deadline. The question now was whether I was going to go down fighting or if I was going to take control of my own destiny. What do I need to do? Victoria reached into her briefcase and pulled out a contract. First, you're going to sign this consulting agreement. Then, you're going to march into Meridian Tech and tell them you've secured the Morrison Industries deal. And then you're going to start documenting everything you can find about their illegal activities. As I read through the contract, I realized that this wasn't just about saving my job anymore. This was about justice, about protecting the people who couldn't protect themselves, and about finally standing up to the corporate bullies who thought they could destroy lives without consequences. I signed the contract, and Victoria Morrison smiled like a shark who just caught her prey. Chapter 3. The Lion's Den. Walking into the Meridian Tech building that morning felt like entering enemy territory. The familiar lobby with its polished marble floors and corporate artwork suddenly seemed sinister, like a facade hiding something rotten underneath. I clutched the Morrison Industries contract in my briefcase, my heart pounding as I rode the elevator to the 42nd floor. The office was buzzing with unusual energy. People were huddled in small groups, whispering urgently and glancing nervously toward the executive suite. I caught fragments of conversations as I walked to my desk. Federal investigation, accounting irregularities, FBI raid. Sarah was waiting for me at my desk, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly. Mike, thank God you're here. Have you seen the news? I've seen it. I kept my voice steady, but inside I was terrified. If Victoria Morrison was right and I was walking into a building full of criminals, then I was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Blackwood's called an emergency meeting for 9 o'clock, all department heads. He's furious about the Tribune article and wants to know who leaked information to the press. I glanced at the clock on my computer screen. It was 8:45 a.m. I had 15 minutes to prepare for what might be the most important meeting of my career. Sarah, I need you to know something. I secured the Morrison Industries deal. Her eyes widened. What? How? I thought James Morrison said he'd never work with us again. He won't work with Meridian Tech. But he's willing to work with me personally, $12.4 million over 3 years, with $4 million up front. Sarah stared at me in shock. Mike, that's exactly what you needed. But how did you manage to… I'll explain later. Right now, I need you to help me document everything we can find about the budget allocations for the past 6 months. Financial records, email communications, anything that might show where the money's really going. Why would we need to do that? I looked around the office, making sure no one was listening. Because I think the federal investigation is just the beginning, and I think we're working for criminals. Before Sarah could respond, Blackwood's assistant appeared at my desk. Mr. Patterson? Mr. Blackwood would like to see you in his office immediately. My blood ran cold. Had he somehow found out about my meeting with Victoria Morrison? Did he know about the contract? I followed the assistant through the maze of cubicles and offices toward the executive suite. Blackwood's office was a monument to corporate excess, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River, a massive mahogany desk, leather furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars. Richard Blackwood was standing with his back to me, looking out at the city. He was a tall man in his early 50s, with silver hair and the kind of lean build that came from expensive personal trainers and country club tennis matches. Everything about him screamed privilege and power. Michael, please sit down. I took the chair across from his desk, trying to keep my hands steady. You wanted to see me? He turned around slowly, and I was struck by how tired he looked. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usually perfect appearance seemed strained. I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Did you leak information about our internal operations to the press? No, sir. I had no idea about any federal investigation until I saw the Tribune article this morning. He studied my face for a long moment. The timing is interesting, don't you think? You're given a challenging deadline, and suddenly there's a federal investigation that could potentially interfere with your ability to meet that deadline. I don't see how the investigation affects my ability to secure new business, sir. Blackwood walked around his desk and sat down, steepling his fingers. Actually, Michael, I have some good news. I've been reviewing your performance metrics, and I think the 30-day deadline might have been overly ambitious. I'm prepared to extend it to 90 days. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. He was trying to keep me around longer, probably to see if I was the leak. If I revealed that I'd already secured the Morrison deal, he'd know something was wrong. That's generous of you, sir. But actually, I think I might have some promising developments. Oh? I've been reaching out to some of my former contacts. Nothing concrete yet, but there are some interesting possibilities. It was a complete lie, but I needed to buy time to figure out how to handle this situation. If Blackwood suspected I was working against him, my life could be in danger. Excellent. I knew you'd rise to the challenge. He leaned back in his chair. Michael, I want you to know that despite this federal investigation nonsense, I have complete confidence in our operations here. We run a clean business, and any suggestion otherwise is just our competitors trying to damage our reputation. Of course, sir. I'm going to need you to be my eyes and ears over the next few weeks. If you hear any rumors, any speculation about our business practices, I want you to report it directly to me. Can I count on you? The irony was almost laughable. He was asking me to spy on my own colleagues while I was secretly working to expose his crimes. Absolutely, sir. Good. Now, I have another assignment for you. I want you to review all of our government contracts from the past 2 years. Make sure everything is properly documented, all the invoices are accurate, all the deliverables are accounted for. Can you handle that? My heart was racing. He was asking me to audit the very contracts that were likely at the center of the federal investigation. Either he was incredibly arrogant or he was setting me up to take the fall. I'd be happy to help with that, sir. Excellent. I'll have the files sent to your office this afternoon. He stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. Michael, I want you to know that I appreciate your loyalty. In times like these, it's important to know who you can trust. As I walked back to my desk, I felt like I was walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers. Blackwood was clearly suspicious, but he was also giving me access to exactly the kind of evidence that Victoria Morrison said the federal investigators would need. Sarah was waiting for me, her face full of questions. What did he want? He wants me to audit all the government contracts from the past 2 years, and he wants me to spy on our colleagues for him. Mike, this is getting dangerous. Maybe we should just… No. I sat down at my desk and pulled out the Morrison Industries contract. We're going to see this through. But first, I need to make a phone call. I dialed Victoria Morrison's number, my hands shaking slightly as I waited for her to answer. Victoria Morrison. Mrs. Morrison. It's Michael Patterson. I think we need to meet again. Tonight. Is there a problem? Blackwood's getting suspicious, and he's given me access to exactly the kind of evidence your husband's friends in the federal government are going to need. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Michael, I need you to be very careful. If Blackwood suspects you're working against him, he's capable of more than just firing you. What do you mean? I mean that the last person who tried to expose the corruption at Meridian Tech ended up in a car accident. A very convenient car accident. The blood drained from my face. Are you saying? I'm saying that you're playing a very dangerous game, Michael, and the stakes are higher than you realize. As I hung up the phone, I looked around the office with new eyes. Every colleague could be a spy. Every conversation could be monitored. Every decision could be my last. But Emma's face flashed in my mind, and I knew I had to see this through. I had no idea that by the end of the week, everything I thought I knew about Meridian Tech, about Richard Blackwood, and about my own life would be turned upside down. Chapter 4. The Evidence. The next 3 days passed in a blur of paranoia and careful investigation. I spent my mornings reviewing government contracts, documenting irregularities, and secretly photographing evidence with my phone. My evenings were spent in clandestine meetings with Victoria Morrison, passing along information that would eventually find its way to federal investigators. The deeper I dug into Meridian Tech's financial records, the more horrified I became. The fraud wasn't just extensive, it was systematic, organized, and had been going on for years. Blackwood and his inner circle had been systematically overcharging government clients, inflating contract values, and pocketing the difference through a complex network of shell companies. The worst part was discovering how many people were involved. Janet from accounting wasn't just processing invoices. She was actively falsifying billing records. Tom from IT wasn't just maintaining computers. He was helping to delete digital evidence. Even some of my own colleagues in business development were complicit, knowingly pursuing contracts that were designed to defraud taxpayers. On Thursday evening, I was working late in the office, photographing a particularly damning set of documents when I heard footsteps in the hallway. The building should have been nearly empty at 9 p.m., but someone was walking purposefully toward my office. I quickly closed the files and pretended to be working on my laptop as Sarah appeared in my doorway. But something was wrong. Her usual warm smile was replaced by a cold, calculating expression that I'd never seen before. Working late again, Mike? Just trying to get caught up on the contract reviews. You know how it is. She walked into my office and closed the door behind her. Actually, I don't think I do know how it is. Why don't you tell me what you're really doing here? My heart was pounding, but I tried to keep my voice steady. I'm not sure what you mean. I mean, why are you really reviewing these contracts? Why are you taking pictures of financial documents? And why are you meeting with Victoria Morrison? The last question hit me like a physical blow. How do you know about... Mike, I've been working for Richard Blackwood for 3 years. Not officially, of course. Officially, I'm just your colleague and friend. But my real job is to monitor potential threats to the organization. People who might be getting too curious about things they shouldn't be curious about. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Sarah, the person I'd trusted most in the world, had been spying on me for months. Every conversation we'd had, every confidence I'd shared, had been reported back to Blackwood. Sarah, I don't understand. We're friends. We've worked together for 4 years, 2 months, and 16 days. I know exactly how long we've worked together, Mike, because that's when they assigned me to monitor you. You've always been too independent, too principled. They knew eventually you'd become a problem. So what happens now? She pulled out her phone and showed me a text message. Now you're going to call Victoria Morrison and tell her that you've changed your mind. You're going to return whatever evidence you've gathered, and you're going to forget everything you've learned about Meridian Tech's business practices. And if I don't, then I'm going to send this text message to a very dangerous man who specializes in making problems disappear. Permanently. I looked at her phone screen and saw a message that made my blood run cold. Patterson is ready for termination, awaiting your authorization. Sarah, you don't have to do this. Whatever they're paying you, whatever they've promised you, it's not worth becoming a murderer. Mike, you have no idea what you're dealing with. This isn't just about Meridian Tech. This is about a network of companies and government officials who have been working together for years. You think you're exposing a simple fraud case, but you're actually threatening a multi-billion-dollar operation that reaches into the highest levels of government. Then why not just fire me? Why the elaborate setup with the impossible deadline? Because firing you would have raised questions. You're well-liked, you have a good reputation, and you might have talked to the wrong people. The deadline was supposed to make your termination look justified, but then you had to go and find the Morrison deal, and now you're a loose end that needs to be tied up. I realized that I was completely trapped. Sarah had been monitoring my every move, which meant that Blackwood knew about my meetings with Victoria Morrison, knew about the evidence I'd gathered, and was probably already planning to eliminate me. "What about Emma?" I asked. "She's just a kid. She doesn't know anything about this." Something flickered in Sarah's eyes, a moment of genuine emotion that broke through her cold facade. "Emma will be fine as long as you cooperate. But if you try to run, if you try to contact the FBI, if you try to expose this operation, then I can't guarantee her safety." The threat to my daughter was the final straw. I stood up from my desk, my hands clenched into fists. "You're threatening to hurt a 15-year-old girl? I'm trying to save your life, Mike, and hers. This is bigger than you understand, and the people involved don't leave loose ends." Before I could respond, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Victoria Morrison's number. "Answer it," Sarah said. "And remember what I told you." I picked up the phone with shaking hands. "Hello? Michael, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for hours. The federal investigators want to meet with you tonight. They're ready to move forward with the case." I looked at Sarah, who was watching me with cold, calculating eyes. "Mrs. Morrison, I need to think about this." "Think about what?" "Michael, this is what we've been working toward. The evidence you've gathered is enough to bring down the entire operation." "I know, but I'm starting to have second thoughts. Maybe I should just focus on my own career and leave this alone." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Michael, is someone there with you? Are you in danger?" Sarah held up her phone, showing me the unsent text message. Her finger hovered over the send button. "No, I'm fine. I think I was being naive. Maybe it's better to just let sleeping dogs lie." "Michael, listen to me very carefully. If you're in danger, if someone is threatening you, just say the word deadline, and I'll know you need help." I looked at Sarah, who was listening to every word. If I said the code word, she'd know I was calling for help, and she'd send that text message. But if I didn't, Victoria Morrison would assume I was abandoning the investigation, and Blackwood would get away with everything. "I understand your concerns, Mrs. Morrison, but I think the deadline has passed for this kind of action. I need to focus on my own responsibilities." "I understand. Michael, whatever happens, know that we tried to do the right thing." After I hung up, Sarah smiled for the first time since entering my office. "Good choice, Mike. Now, I need you to gather all the evidence you've collected and bring it to me. We're going to destroy it, and then we're going to pretend this conversation never happened." As I opened my desk drawer to retrieve the files, I realized that I had underestimated the depth of the conspiracy I was dealing with. But I had also underestimated Victoria Morrison's resourcefulness, and I had no idea that help was already on the way. Chapter 5. The Cavalry Arrives. I was in the process of handing over the evidence files to Sarah when we heard the unmistakable sound of multiple vehicles pulling up outside the building. Sarah's confident expression faltered for the first time as she moved to the window and looked down at the street. "That's impossible," she whispered. I joined her at the window and saw a scene that looked like something from a movie. FBI vehicles, Chicago police cars, and several unmarked black SUVs had surrounded the building. Agents in bulletproof vests were positioning themselves at every entrance. "Sarah, what's happening?" She was frantically typing on her phone, trying to send messages, but nothing was going through. "They're jamming our communications. Mike, you have to understand, this changes everything. If the FBI is here, if they have evidence, then everyone connected to this operation is in danger." The elevator dinged, and we could hear footsteps in the hallway. Multiple sets of footsteps, moving quickly and purposefully toward our office. "Michael Patterson?" A voice called out from the hallway. "This is Agent Rebecca Torres with the FBI. We need to speak with you." Sarah grabbed my arm. "Mike, listen to me. These people don't understand what they're dealing with. The corruption goes higher than you can imagine. If you cooperate with them, you'll be putting yourself and Emma in danger from people who can reach into federal prison. And if I don't cooperate, then you'll be putting yourself in danger from people who are already in this building." Agent Torres appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 other agents. She was a woman in her 40s with short black hair and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she'd seen everything the world had to offer. "Mr. Patterson, I'm Agent Torres. We need to have a conversation." "Agent Torres, I'm Sarah Chen, Mr. Patterson's colleague. Is there some kind of problem?" Agent Torres looked at Sarah with the kind of expression that suggested she knew exactly who Sarah was and what she'd been doing. "Ms. Chen, we're going to need to speak with you as well. In fact, we're going to need to speak with everyone who's been working on government contracts for the past 2 years." "I'm not sure I understand," Sarah said, but her voice was shaking now. "Ma'am, we have evidence of systematic fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government. We also have evidence that certain employees of this company have been engaged in witness intimidation and threats of violence." I looked at Sarah, who had gone completely pale. "Agent Torres, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Mr. Patterson, we know about your meetings with Victoria Morrison. We know about the evidence you've been gathering. And we know that you've been threatened. How could you possibly know about—" Agent Torres held up a small device about the size of a button. "Mrs. Morrison gave you this 2 days ago when you met at the coffee shop. It's been recording everything that's happened in this office since then." I remembered Victoria Morrison brushing against me as she stood up to leave our meeting. She must have attached the device to my jacket without me noticing. "You've been recording us?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ms. Chen, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, witness intimidation, and making terroristic threats. You have the right to remain silent." As Agent Torres read Sarah her rights, I felt a mixture of relief and terror. Relief that I wasn't going to be murdered in my office, but terror at the realization of how close I'd come to being eliminated. "Agent Torres, what about Emma, my daughter? Sarah said that if I cooperated with you, she'd be in danger." "Mr. Patterson, we've had protective custody agents watching your daughter since yesterday. She's safe, and she's going to stay safe." "Yesterday? But how did you know?" "Mr. Patterson, we've been investigating Meridian Tech for 8 months. Your ex-wife contacted us 3 weeks ago when she noticed that Emma was being followed to school. We've been watching you and your family ever since." The pieces were starting to fall into place. "Jennifer called the FBI? Your ex-wife is a smart woman. She noticed that Emma was being watched, and she put 2 and 2 together. She figured out that your work situation was more dangerous than just corporate politics." As the agents led Sarah out of the office in handcuffs, she looked back at me with something that might have been regret. "Mike, you have no idea what you've done. The people behind this aren't just going to disappear because you arrested a few middle managers." "Ms. Chen, you're not helping your case," Agent Torres said firmly. After Sarah was gone, Agent Torres sat down across from my desk. "Mr. Patterson, we need to talk about what happens next. The evidence you've gathered is crucial to our case, but we're going to need your testimony to make it stick." "What about my safety?" "Sarah said that these people can reach into federal prison. She's not wrong about the scope of the conspiracy. We're dealing with a network that includes defense contractors, government officials, and organized crime figures. But we have resources too, and we take the safety of our witnesses very seriously." "What about my job? If Meridian Tech is shut down, what happens to all the honest employees who had nothing to do with this?" Agent Torres smiled for the first time since arriving. "Mr. Patterson, Meridian Tech isn't going to be shut down. It's going to be reorganized under new management, and those honest employees are going to keep their jobs. In fact, we're going to need someone with your expertise to help run the business development department during the transition." "Are you offering me a job?" "Not exactly. But Morrison Industries has expressed interest in acquiring the legitimate assets of Meridian Tech once the criminal elements are removed, and they've specifically requested that you head up the integration process." I thought about Victoria Morrison's razor-sharp smile, about the way she'd maneuvered events to bring down Blackwood while positioning her husband's company to benefit from the aftermath. She'd played a much longer game than I'd realized. So, this was all planned? The Morrison deal, the federal investigation, everything? Mr. Patterson, sometimes justice and business interests align. The important thing is that the corruption is being exposed and the criminals are being brought to justice. As Agent Torres spoke, I could hear voices and footsteps throughout the building as other employees were being questioned, and in some cases, arrested. The Meridian Tech that I'd worked for was dying, but maybe something better would rise from its ashes. What happens now? Now you go home to your daughter. You testify when we need you to testify, and you help us make sure that this kind of corruption never happens again. As I gathered my personal belongings and prepared to leave the office for what might be the last time, I realized that the impossible deadline had actually been a gift. It had forced me to see the truth about the company I'd devoted my life to, and it had given me the chance to do something meaningful with my career. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt like descending from one world into another. The corporate criminal I'd been working for was gone, but the man who'd stood up to corruption was just beginning his real career. Chapter 6. The New Beginning. 3 months later, I stood in the conference room of the newly restructured Meridian Tech, looking out at the Chicago skyline on a crisp January morning. The federal investigation had concluded with 17 arrests, including Richard Blackwood, who was facing 40 years in federal prison. The company had been reorganized under Morrison Industries management, and I'd been named Vice President of Ethical Business Development. The title wasn't just corporate speak. My job was to ensure that every contract, every deal, every business relationship met the highest standards of integrity. It was challenging work, but it was the kind of challenge that made me excited to get up in the morning. Emma was with me that day, taking advantage of a teacher development day to visit my office. At 15, she was old enough to understand what had happened, and she'd told me how proud she was that I'd done the right thing, even when it was dangerous. "Dad, do you ever regret it?" she asked, looking out at the city below. "Standing up to those people, I mean. Your life would have been a lot simpler if you'd just taken the easy way out." I thought about Sarah, who was serving 5 years in federal prison. I thought about Blackwood, who would likely die behind bars. I thought about all the government contractors who were no longer being overcharged, all the taxpayers whose money was no longer being stolen. Emma, I learned something important through all of this. Sometimes the easy way isn't actually easy at all. Sometimes what looks like the safe choice is the most dangerous thing you can do. What do you mean? I mean that if I'd given up when Blackwood gave me that impossible deadline, if I'd just accepted defeat and looked for another job, I would have spent the rest of my life knowing that I'd walked away from doing the right thing. And that would have been harder to live with than any of the danger I faced. Victoria Morrison knocked on the conference room door and entered with her characteristic confidence. Over the past 3 months, she'd become not just a business partner, but a mentor. Her husband, James, had been true to his word. The Morrison Industries deal had grown into a $50 million partnership that was revolutionizing logistics technology. "Michael, Emma, I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Mrs. Morrison. Emma was just asking about the investigation." Victoria smiled at my daughter. "Your father is a hero, Emma. What he did took enormous courage, and it's made the world a little bit safer for honest businesses." "Mrs. Morrison, can I ask you something?" Emma said. "How did you know that my dad would do the right thing? How did you know he wouldn't just take the money and run?" Victoria looked at me thoughtfully. "Because I'd been watching him for months before we ever met. I knew how he treated his colleagues, how he fought for fair contracts, how he never cut corners even when it would have been easier. Character isn't something you can fake, Emma. It shows up in everything you do." After Victoria left, Emma and I walked through the office together. Many of the faces were the same. The honest employees who'd had nothing to do with the corruption were still there, working for a company they could finally be proud of. But the atmosphere was completely different. There was a sense of purpose, of integrity, that had been missing before. "Dad, what's going to happen next?" "Well, the Morrison Industries partnership is going to keep growing. We're developing AI systems that will help companies move goods more efficiently while reducing environmental impact, and we're doing it honestly, transparently, with full accountability to our clients and to the government. That sounds amazing. It is amazing, Emma. For the first time in my career, I feel like I'm building something that matters, something that makes the world better. As we prepared to leave the office, I reflected on how much had changed since that October morning when I'd received Blackwood's impossible deadline. I'd lost a job that I thought I loved, but I'd gained a career that I actually believed in. I'd discovered that a trusted colleague was a spy, but I'd also learned that there were people like Victoria Morrison who were willing to risk everything to fight corruption. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the things that seem designed to destroy us are actually opportunities to become the people we're meant to be. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jennifer, my ex-wife. Emma told me about her visit to your office today. She's so proud of you, Michael. We both are. That message meant more to me than any promotion or salary increase ever could. I'd faced down criminals and federal investigators. I'd risked my life and my career. But the most important thing was that my daughter could look up to me again. As Emma and I walked out of the building together, she asked one more question. Dad, do you think other people will learn from what happened here? I hope so, sweetheart. I hope that when people hear this story, they'll remember that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. And I hope they'll remember that sometimes the people who seem most powerful are actually the most vulnerable, because their power is built on lies. 6 months later, I received an invitation to speak at a conference about corporate ethics. As I stood at the podium, looking out at an audience of business leaders, I thought about that impossible deadline that had changed my life. The greatest challenges in our careers aren't the ones that test our skills or our intelligence, I told the audience. They're the ones that test our character. When someone gives you an impossible deadline, when someone threatens your livelihood, when someone asks you to compromise your principles for the sake of your career, that's when you find out who you really are. I paused, thinking about Emma, about Victoria Morrison, about all the people who had supported me through the darkest period of my professional life. I'm here to tell you that character isn't just about doing the right thing when it's easy. It's about doing the right thing when it costs you everything you think you want. Because sometimes, losing everything you think you want is the only way to gain everything you actually need. As I finished my speech and walked off the stage, I felt a sense of completion that I'd never experienced before. The impossible deadline had seemed like the end of my world, but it had actually been the beginning of my real life. And somewhere in the audience, I hoped there was someone who would hear my story and find the courage to stand up to their own impossible deadline, knowing that sometimes the hardest path is the one that leads home. If this story touched your heart in any way, don't forget to leave your comment down below saying what you thought. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next exciting stories like this one.